Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Vladeck, co-founder and co-CEO of Recast, the world's most advanced media marketing platform. With me today is Professor Elea Feit, Associate Professor of Marketing and Associate Dean of Research at Drexel University's LeBow College of Business. I got to know her when she was at the Wharton Customer Analytics Initiative. She started her career at General Motors. She's done a stint at Amazon. She's done a stint at a company called The Modelers, and she also is the co-author of a book called R for Marketing Research and Analytics. Today, we talk about brand awareness, why it's important, and how to include it in your marketing mix models. We also talk about branded search and why using it in your media mix model could make sense or could not, and some common pitfalls there. We also talk about experimentation. We cover why it's super important to run experiments. The quote, "I know half my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half." It's actually more like, "I know 90% of my marketing is wasted and I just don't know which half." Experiment can really help you uncover it. It's super valuable. So we talk a little bit about how to run good geolift experiments, some limitations of common practices. And then finally, we land on, I think, one of Elea's most interesting papers, which is test and roll. So if you need to run a quick test, if you've got a hard deadline, how can you do something quickly and really impactfully? So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I certainly did. Really love connecting with Elea. I think she's a really wonderful person and has a lot of expertise and insight to bring. Thank you very much. Elea, it is great to see you again. Really appreciate you making the time. So we have a number of topics to cover. Your interests and Recast's business intersect in a lot of interesting places. But where I wanted to start was this question about publicity. And this is actually quite a salient topic recently because there was quite a lot of bad publicity in the election. We're not super political, so I won't get into it. But there is this saying that any publicity is good publicity. Any media is good media. But we've also seen pretty negative business performance. I mean, I think it was about a year ago, Bud Light had this thing where a large segment of the US got really mad at them because of some of their ad choices and actually lost the number one spot. So I think it's Modelo now that's the number one beer. You've done some research showing that some negative publicity can actually be good on brand perception and business performance.
Yeah. Although interesting that you related it to that particular scenario, because that might be one where bad publicity is bad.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what we did. It's one of the projects where evidence we were able to bring to bear was kind of the weakest it could be. We were looking at survey data from YouGov Brand Index, which is daily brand tracker, where people say, they answer questions like, which of the following brands are you aware of? They're presented with the category and click which ones they're aware of. And they say, which of the following brands have you heard something about in the last week? And they can click a button, red for bad news, green for good news, or gray for no news.
You can really quickly survey one could take.
We took that data. They also ask about purchase intent and a few other things. We used all of that data as aggregate measures of daily brand happenings. We found this funny thing in the mobile phone industry. When a brand has a bump in their negative news, later they get a bump in purchase intent, 1 to 2 week lag.
Interesting. Was the negative news sort of common sense, or was the negative news something that you saw in the brand index?
Something we saw in the brand index. So we have no idea what it is.
There was some news that maybe you knew about, maybe you didn't, and then you saw it in the brand index. There are a lot of red buttons getting hit.
Yeah.
And then
there's also a lag correlation between green buttons, the positive news, and purchase intent. Both seem to be going well. Someone said, show us another category. And we did it for the car industry and we didn't find the effect. We're not really sure exactly what's going on, but we think it has to do with what bad news is. So, oh man, I just spent 2 hours downloading the new iOS. That's bad news, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that bad. And it's also something that signals that I still have the phone. I still use the phone. It was worth 2 hours to do this crazy download. And so we think in the mobile phone category, the kind of bad news you hear is stuff like I broke my phone, etc. And in the car industry, the kind of bad news you hear is this car stranded me I couldn't get to work.
Into a lake or,
It's crazy. The battery caught on fire. Yeah. So we actually see a negative effect of bad news in the car industry. And we think it's because it's just more important when something bad happens with your car. And also it's like the news is worse.
I think that,
but we were never able to actually dig that apart in the data because all we had were these aggregate data correlations.
Right. So one hypothesis that I would have that I'm curious to get your take on is that I bet there's a relationship between the purchase cycle length and whether or not bad publicity is good for purchase, because we know from the How Brands Grow research that distribution matters a lot. A lot of purchases are actually super. So if you're just there at the right time, if customers are aware of you or it's in front of you because you have a lot of distribution, you'll grow your sales, even if you haven't grown anything else about the brand or made the product any better. It's just a volume thing. My guess is that if you have a lot of bad publicity in a low, fast-moving segment, just the fact that your brand is slightly more salient, people may have forgotten why, might increase the purchase probability because it's more top of mind. Whereas for a long research cycle product, you're going to get into like, oh, why was there bad news? You're going to Google a product and then see that like, oh, the car caught on fire or the GPS sent me into a lake or something like that.
We were looking at durables with long purchase cycles. The best that bad news can do is take people who are late in the funnel and move them around a little bit, but it can't, it's not bringing new people into the market or anything. There's another paper that I didn't write. It was written by a couple of professors at Northwestern and Cornell, that they looked at the Trump bean promotion. Do you remember that? Trump was promoting Goya beans and his family all promoted Goya beans.
As one does.
They actually looked at the effect of this on sales. They found a really interesting thing. The boycott was much bigger than the boycott. But then I actually asked them how many weeks out did you look? Maybe you should look at 12 weeks. The boycott happens really fast and then it's over fast.
People
Today,
supporting...
I decide I love Trump. I want to buy the Goya beans. And in the next grocery trip, they buy an extra can of Goya beans. But to see the boycott, you have to experience that counterfactual would have bought the beans.
Right.
Or else you can't see the dip. And it's way more spread out because people don't buy beans every week.
And maybe the boycott is
they have 8 cans in the cupboard already. It just takes a while before you see that they have decided not to purchase the beans.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
The paper's called Spilling the Beans, which I think is hysterical.
One possible current test of my research linked hypothesis would be the McDonald's E. coli outbreak. I don't know, you may not be aware, but there was some incidentally, like it had nothing to do with him, but right after Trump worked at the McDonald's, they came out and said, oh, there's actually an E. coli outbreak. We're pulling all of our quarter pounders off the menu, at least in some regions. And it made the news. So I'm curious if in a couple of months, we see like, oh, people have been thinking about McDonald's a lot and they've forgotten why. But now all of a sudden they're hungry for a Big Mac or something like that. They make a purchase. We'll see. Definitely
put E. coli in that category of way worse than I broke my screen.
Yes, true. Don't want to get to the hospital.
Right.
These kinds of questions are ones that we get all the time. A lot of our customers are really interested in parameterizing brand, which I'm sure is really difficult. You can measure aided awareness, unaided awareness, purchase intent, but it actually can be pretty difficult to get these metrics, right? Brand trackers aren't super
expensive.
They're super expensive and they're very noisy. It's much more expensive if you want to zoom in on the actual segments that you care about. So one of the ways our customers want to measure brand awareness or intent is using branded search volume or organic search volume as a proxy. Have you had any experience with that? Is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked on a project with Google to explore that question. They were really interested in that. I worked on a project where we got individual consumers to agree to answer a survey that would be like a traditional brand tracker. We asked them about cell phones, cars, and retailers. I'm really passionate about durables marketing. I actually grew up in the car industry. So my first real grown-up job was at GM in the market research group. So I tend to think about durables a lot. Anyway, we had these people say, yes, I will be in your study. As part of this study, I will allow Google to connect my search over a 4-month period with a brand tracker in the middle of that period so that we could see how they answered the survey. And the idea was to relate people's search behavior to their brand attitudes. We had this idea that if people have, high awareness, high purchase intent, they're going to be much more likely to actually search for that brand. So to produce that organic branded search. And the thing I love about this project was we had that rich individual level data. So we knew this person answered the survey this way, and this is what their search history looked like. That's powerful, right? To have that individual level variation in the data, rather than looking at how things are going up and down on average over time. We had that data from Google. I never touched the data because data cannot leave Google. There was a programmer and an analyst on the Google side that did all of the analysis. I could screen share with them, but I would write the R code against simulated data and then send it to the analyst. It would break because the real data is not how you imagined it. Yeah. What we found out was that it's correlated mostly with lower funnel measures like purchase intent or familiarity, not awareness.
I'm aware of Honda, but not going to necessarily
that doesn't mean anything.
Honda.
It's not strongly correlated. If I say I'm familiar with Honda, or I say for my next car I would be interested in a Honda, then I'm much more likely to search for Honda. In the survey, we also asked them what they own, because these are durables. So they own something right now. That is the biggest predictor of branded search in durables. Do you know what's going on there?
What's going wrong with my car? Or
why would Ellie Feit search for iPhone? Because she's trying to do something with her iPhone.
Right. I can imagine
it has nothing to do with purchase intent.
Specifically with the car, I can imagine
how do I turn off this setting?
Exactly. Yeah. My car's making a weird sound, or how do I pop the hood?
Where do I get my car oil changed? So that is the strongest predictor. So if you're going to use the brand trends data, the organic brand search, there's actually a setting in Google Trends where you can say, I only want shopping related searches. And I'm not sure exactly what Google does to identify a search as being shopping related, but those are better predictors of aggregate brand attitudes, because you need to filter out that half of the search volume is people trying to do things with their current brand.
Right. What you're saying is that a lot of search, especially for durables like phones or cars or complicated machines in some sense, if you're searching for the brand name because you're trying to debug something or troubleshoot something or do something that you have never done before, and of course you're including
buy a case or buy some new tires.
The make and model is going to be in the search, but it has nothing to do with intent. But what you're saying is, okay, Google has some way of trying to filter that information out and remain with just the shopping searches. But it seems what you're saying, though, is those shopping searches, at least in principle and to some degree in practice, are pretty good indications of lower funnel brand awareness and intent, right?
If we do a causal diagram, there's a lot of problems here, because the fact that I own this iPhone also means
you're picking up on something probably even more advanced than what I was saying. Okay. A lot of our customers are interested in long-term brand effects. If I do some TV advertising and I've introduced a bunch of people to my brand and I'm getting them from unaware to aware, is there anything that can tell me that I did that and that will then be later on predicted?
So you want to use Google Trends as the predicted, not the predictor.
I think we want to use it as both, ideally. Is there some way to connect between hey, I did a TV advertisement in October, and in November, I saw that 1 million more people became aware of the brand. And then in January, that 1 million more people that became aware of the brand converted, and obviously you won't know the rate or any of these numbers, but you would see that effect in the sales later on. Because going from October to January is quite a long time. It's how to draw the line. But if you have some intermediate metric, you can start to see the funnel happening in the data. But it sounds like what you're saying is, no, you only see the branded searches sort of right before the sales happen. Right. And as a link in the chain, it wouldn't actually add a lot of value, unfortunately. Is that sort of where?
Yeah, because people don't search for brands when they're not shopping.
Right.
This may astound marketers, but people aren't out there just, well, actually, my husband is a car guy. He's the exception that proves the rule. He does search for car brands randomly just because
He's a car geek.
But it has nothing to do with his purchase. He hasn't bought a new car in the last 20 years. For most people, they don't search for Lexus until they're actively shopping for cars. Can you get at someone's deeper attitudes? You're getting this very self-selected sample of shoppers.
It's unfortunate.
It's the best shoppers and owners. If you don't clean out the owners,
We're going to be
unfortunate.
Disappointing large swaths of the audience here.
I'm sorry.
I know.
But we are making the YouGovs of the world very happy.
We're making YouGov very happy. We're making everybody else a little sad. So does this mean that we are landing then on, okay, let's say we wanted to do what I was talking about, right? Which is add in some links to the chain.
Like ads predicts purchases.
Sales, right? And we want to add some stuff in the middle in order to build a model that includes things like increasing brand awareness on sales later on. The best measures that we'll have of brand awareness really are these traditional brand tracking type surveys where you can actually ask people, what brands do you know of? Or do you know this brand? We're asking it directly. That's sort of where we're landing.
I think that's the right answer. And if you're investing oodles of money in television advertising, it's probably worth it.
To do the brand tracker. One of the issues that I've seen with brand trackers, maybe you could talk a little bit about, is that they're very noisy, right? I mean, we talk about
it's so noisy.
So noisy.
YouGov, especially because of the daily data.
Right.
It's just like,
the election is probably one of the most surveyed quantities on Earth. You could have one person up +3 and the other person up +3 one day apart.
That's how sampling works, Tom.
That's why I'm hunting for an alternative method where there's actually observed data that we can look at. Knowing that the trackers are this noisy, in your experience, are they still valuable? Is there still directional data that you can get out of it?
I have had good luck with an aggregate marketing mix model. I've done this for consulting for a pizza company, introduced through YouGov. They had the brand tracker and wanted to add a marketing mix model. We had ads predict attitudes and attitudes predict sales. It was pizza, so the purchase cycles are really short.
Yep.
So we weren't like trying to get this idea of people moving down the funnel, but we were seeing strong correlations between basically the different creatives. So this pizza company changed their creatives every 2 weeks, and we could see when the creatives bombed, and we could see it faster in a model that wasn't to sales, that was to the brand attitude,
right?
Where people are just losing interest in this brand. And they had an ad campaign that really was bad. It actually produced negative changes in the attitude. It was a mea culpa kind of ad. So we used to be bad, but now we're better. And that was not effective. It produced negative changes in attitude.
I want to switch gears for a bit. We talked a lot about awareness and publicity and how to include that in models. And I think we landed on it's difficult but doable, and you can do it using traditional survey methods.
There are people who've done traditional marketing mix model with brand search as a predictor of sales. It does have positive prediction ability for sales. I've seen people do that in multiple categories in academic papers that have been well vetted. So it is possible that could be useful signal, but it's not going to get at this thing that you're interested in. It does predict sales, but does it really get us a measure of what people are thinking in the general population?
Yeah, and since you mentioned it, Recast includes branded search spend, which is very correlated with search query volume in our MMMs. The caveat, though, is that we really think of that as a lower funnel activity. And the big thing is to do it right, we believe in it, is that you have to include it as both an input and an output. Obviously, there is some causal effect of the branded search ad on increasing purchases, but people only come to search for your branded query if something else happened. They had to learn about the brand. If you're including it as a predictor alongside all of the other channels that you're modeling, it can mediate the effect of TV. TV causes you to learn about the brand and then search for the branded keyword, and then that causes some increase in sales intent. There's sort of a double counting, because did the TV cause the sale, or did the branded search query cause the sale? Because the TV caused the branded search query. And so in our model, we have multiple stages to account for all of that. We would caution against just including branded search spend or query volume alongside TV for that reason.
Yeah, they're high.
It can be highly correlated. And if you draw a DAG, it's like the branded search spend mediates the effect. It stands in the middle. And so if you really want the effect of TV in totality, you have to do something a little bit more complicated, at least we think. Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about one of the things that you're best known for, which is experimentation. You have a lot of great papers on the optimal ways to run A/B tests, and let's say you have multiple times you can run a test or just one time and you want to figure out what the sample size should be. But I want to talk a little bit more broadly first, which is why do you think companies are so averse to running experiments? One of the things that we struggle with sometimes with our customers, and then we see more broadly, is we'll say, hey, according to the model, you should be spending a lot more on YouTube or a lot more on podcasts or a lot less on this channel. Evidence for doing it can be very strong. The payoffs, if we're right, could be very large. Yet sometimes we hit this like organizational inertia. So there's this like risk aversion. And is this something that you've experienced? And how do you think about that?
I have. I spent a good 2 or 3 years as a cheerleader for experiments, saying if you want to know the answers to these questions, you really should be running experiments. There's a couple things. One is what economists call an agency problem. The people deciding how much to spend on ads have made a career being the person who decides how much to spend on ads. It would be very bad for their career if they were to find out that they'd been spending the wrong amount. And so that makes the decision makers reluctant to find out the real answer because they've convinced everyone around them that they know the answer. The other issue, I did a sabbatical at Amazon to work on this with Amazon ads. The execution is actually incredibly complicated, especially in the media space, because you need your media provider to randomize the advertising for you. So there's a lot of communication overhead in getting that to happen. And I actually think it's more likely that the platforms will either decide to do this or not because they can build one system and use it for multiple clients. But from a client sitting on the outside, it is tough to execute that randomized experiment properly.
Some channels are much more difficult to experiment than others. Like, for example, TV, the kind of TV that you buy, if you make a big national buy on premier channels during premier times of the day, you can only buy that if you're committing a substantial amount of money.
Right.
If you're only committing some amount of money to test it out, you're going to be on different channels.
Digital remnant.
You're on some cooking channel at 2 a.m. Whether or not that's representative of what it would be like if you did a big national buy is debatable at best. And so that is one reason.
Right. The platforms have incentives too. The platforms do not necessarily want their customers to know what the advertising is worth. That's part of this whole gestalt of the business. I convince you that my TV show is great and you buy the ads in my TV show. That's sort of the sense of the business. As things have gotten digital, there's still this deep reluctance to report to advertisers the effectiveness of their ads. Absolutely. One of the things I'm personally obsessed with is histograms of advertising effects. So people that somehow amass a large number of experiments or some really good high quality mixed model estimates for multiple brands. And there's 2 of these I've seen. One was with mixed models, but really carefully done mixed models for every product that Nielsen has grocery store data for. And then the other one is a set of ads on Yahoo, ad experiments run on the Yahoo homepage for a variety of products. When you look at these histograms, what you see is they kind of mass up near zero. Yeah. Most ads don't work. Yeah. But they have this tremendously long tail. Yeah. So the adage that, it's attributed to Wanamaker or Lord Leverhulme, depending on what continent you're on, that I know that some of my ads work, I just don't know which ones, which half, is like these histograms actually bear out in the data that that's what's going on. So Like if I am an ad platform, do I really want to tell half of my customers that they're not getting any value from my ads? Probably not. Nobody really knows what the equilibrium would be if everybody really understood exactly how much their ads were working. That's going to lead to a whole different equilibrium in the ad business, and nobody can figure out who the winners and losers would be. So everybody's kind of afraid to go to this measurement driven world, even though people like you and me are screaming from the rooftops that this should be a measurement driven world.
I really want to stick with this histogram for a second, because I think that there's a couple of different, like, really insightful things here. So the first thing I'll say is, one, that I'm just incredibly relieved that that's what the empirical histogram looks like, because our priors, when we set a recast model, is heavily weighted towards zero. It looks almost like an exponential distribution, where the mode is at zero and then there's a long tail. That had more to do with regularization than it did with knowing what the empirics were. The second thing is, I think that illustrates a very large disconnect between how people talk about advertising and what the reality is. Because most people think about advertising as all being kind of massed around the average effect, right? If I have a mix of 30 channels, I know my paid ROI on average is about 2. I think people are going to think, okay, my worst channel is probably like 1.5 and my best channel is probably like 2.5, but they're all pretty close to 2, right? When in reality, it's going to be like 25 of your channels are very close to 0, and then 5 of your channels are at like 5x or 6x. On average, it's 2, right? But really, there's this huge amount of heterogeneity in your mix where some are really performing and most are really not. And I don't think anybody talks about ads that way, out in the market. I think most people talk about ads as all having some sort of like average effect.
Say that all again, but replace channels with creatives.
Totally. Also that, yes.
Half of your creatives are probably not doing that. One of the things about these histograms, you hardly ever see a significant negative effect. Like the two I've seen do not have any significant negative effects. They have somewhere the point estimate, like the best fit number is negative, but then when you look at the uncertainty, you're like, yeah, that it's somewhere around 0. That's basically all we can tell you. So that's a good thing to know. I should mention the names of the papers if people want to chase them.
Absolutely.
One is a paper done by Anna Tuchman at Northwestern, Brad Shapiro and Gunter Hitch, who are at Chicago. That paper is featured in a Freakonomics podcast, so your audience could track that down if they wanted to hear more Anna talking about finding out that most ads don't work and what she thinks that means.
I was just going to say we can include all of these in the show notes.
A working paper by Randall Lewis, who I worked with at Amazon, and Garrett Johnson, who is interested in advertising effects at Boston University. I don't remember the title. It has 273. Like that's the number of advertisements they have in their histogram that they measured.
Oh, interesting. I can't wait to take a look. The other thing I wanted to press on this point, coming back to this histogram right there, it's like most things are 0 and some are amazing. This really militates towards doing more experimentation. If you can imagine a world where all of your advertising was just the average effect, right? You knew you were indifferent. I could spend money on podcasts, I could spend money on TV, I could spend money on Facebook, and it would all have a 2x ROI no matter what. Or a world where almost nothing is working except for a couple channels or a couple creative are really killing it. That pitch to go to a CEO or CMO or a CFO and say, look, in your mix, you've got some channels that are delivering 0 value to you and some that are really doing amazing. We should find out which those are, right? And the only way to do it, can you imagine?
It's the difference between mining for gravel and I just need to scoop the gravel out of the ground and it's all gravel. It's all the same stuff that I want, versus mining for diamonds, where some of the stuff is garbage and some of the stuff is diamonds. And we're much more in that world where some of these ads are garbage or just useless, like the ore around the diamonds, and some of it is diamonds. I'm always very optimistic about the advertising industry. I'm really excited to see what happens in the next 25 years. Some of these people who grew up in digital performance marketing that were more of the diamond mining mindset end up in the CMO
lots
jobs.
Of creative, seeing a lot of daily data, being able to run individual level matchback holdout tests or geo tests.
I want a daily dashboard instead of quarterly deck on my...
bringing that energy to traditional forms of advertising too. Well, I'm hoping that we can see more of that energy happening in the advertising industry. I want to cover one more thing, which is, okay, we've talked about, okay, you need to run experiments, right? Let's give a little bit of color as to how one might run experiments. And one of the things that we look at are doing geographic-based tests, right? And we've talked like it's not always easy to do this, right? With TV, it can be pretty difficult, right? You do a national buy that's different from not doing a national buy. But with channels like Facebook or Google, it's actually pretty easy.
I'm
Running one on Facebook right now. So you've done a lot of work on running these kinds of tests. Can you illustrate, like, in the best case, how they go, and like what are some of the minds that we all need to watch out for if we're going to be doing geolift or geographic based testing in the future?
Yeah. Couple things. Suppose I had two countries that I could advertise in. One easy test is to do the ads in one country and not in the other. That would be pretty easy to execute. You can just call up your media agency and say, I want ads in this country and not that one. That's a normal request. So that has big problem, which is that those two countries aren't really comparable. The central idea of an experiment is that we're going to randomize across a fairly large group of geographic regions or customers. It could be store level if you have a large chain of stores, but we need a fairly large number of these units, at least 100. And we're going to put 50 in one group and 50 in the other. And because we coin tossed, those two groups of 50 counties or DMAs are going to be kind of similar on average. That means you have to do that. And then you're calling your media agency with this really bizarre media plan where I'm going to have ads in Chester County and Delaware County, but not Philadelphia County, not Montgomery County, not Newcastle County in Delaware, but also Lancaster County. It just gets like your media agency is like, what the heck are you doing? And there's like literally someone typing those into your ad buy platform and they screw them up all the time.
Okay.
So that's just a weird thing to do. And we haven't built out the machinery for doing that.
Do you mean like Facebook hasn't built it out, Google hasn't built it out, or those digital channels have it pretty covered, but the legacy media doesn't have it covered? Is this like nobody does this well?
I mean, nobody does this well yet.
Nobody does this well yet. Okay.
So there's another thing that the reason my project in Vienna took 2 doctoral students, one of the doctoral students is working at an ad agency and working with the client. The other one was brought in to actually match the counties. So he has data on the population and the demographics of all the counties in Ireland. And then he's matching them together to find pairs that are very similar. And then we randomize within pairs.
Got it.
And that's a lot of work. Why did we do it? It gives you a more precise estimate. If you help things out by finding these pairs, then the groups are going to be even more similar to each other. And that increases what statisticians call power. It makes it so that our estimates of what the lift is get more tighter precise. And tighter.
Yeah, right.
More precise. So we're not giving you like, oh, the lift is between 50% and 150%. We're saying, okay, the lift is like 93% over the 193%, if that's how you like to think about lift. Anyway, so that matching, like Google published algorithms for doing this like 15 years ago. The white paper is still on their website, but there's no tools for how to do this. There's not even R code for how to do it. It's still the Wild West for these geo experiments. So if you guys are building a tool to do that, that's going to be a huge benefit to your clients. The other thing that I think we should be thinking about that nobody's really thinking about yet is time. The other thing you can do is what some people are calling a switchback experiment, where in addition to having it on in some counties and off in others, you could do a crossover where you run that for 2 weeks and then switch them so that now these counties are on. And that's going to give you even more precision.
Because now you're matched with yourself, ideally.
Although it's not exactly yourself, because yourself in the future is not the same as yourself in the past.
Right. And then there's temporal spillover effects, because you advertised in week 1 and you pulled it off in week 2, then there might be some...
there's other fancier designs, like we run the ads, then we go dark for 2 weeks, and then we switch them.
Yeah.
So there's lots of options for how to set up the design, but just broadly, in addition to geography, we should be thinking about time.
Interesting. There's another problem with time, though, and Well, I think we probably should end here. One problem with time is a lot of businesses are highly seasonal. And so, and they're not really willing to run the test during the high season, right? Like, I don't think you'll convince most brands that sell high price items to run a test during Black Friday or Christmas because there's too much risk involved. The persuasion of a brand to do that would be a tough sell. But the other problem is...
So I have to tell you, I know a brand that does that.
Oh, you do?
So
can you share who
yes,
they are?
I do. In direct marketing, you know that I have a paper called Test and Roll.
Yes.
And it offers a new approach to planning the size of an experiment. The name came from a marketer we were meeting with quarterly just to share notes. We were telling them about the paper, and they're telling us about their uplift model and other stuff. And so we tell them about this paper, and the head of marketing analytics goes, "Oh, we do that. We do that in holiday. We call it test and roll. We just run these really short tests. If there's really bad ads and really good ads, a very short test will detect that." They run an email campaign on a very small number, like a pre-test to 500 people. 500 people get message A, 500 get B, then whatever comes back, they roll. And she credits that to vastly improving their direct marketing comms during holiday. Because they're getting a quick read. Like, it could be that fashion product number 1 and this is fashion product number 2. We don't know which one's going to catch people's attention in an email. If they're the same, it doesn't matter which one we pick. But if one of them's really a rock star, we learn it and then we move. We move fast. We act on that decision. And it was motivated, this whole idea of test and roll. We've got to roll because it's holiday. We can't send it to the analytics team and have them think about it for a week. We just got to go test and roll.
Ellie, this was really great. Really appreciate your time, the wisdom that you've shared. I'm sure our audience, our existing customers, everybody else that is interested in the market will be probably going to the show notes and wanting to learn more about the various papers that you brought up. I definitely know a lot of our customers would be very interested in doing something like test and roll during the upcoming holiday. If not for this Black Friday, then maybe for Christmas, certainly for Valentine's Day and the holidays that are coming. Really appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah. Tom, the feeling is mutual. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. It was a delight being here.
Thank you so much. We'll have to have you back.